They say some mornings change everything. For Michael, that morning started with hope and ended with a choice no man should ever have to make. He stood at the altar, heart pounding, knowing what his bride had planned. He'd given her a piece of himself to save her life, and she'd given him a reason to walk away. But he didn't run, he stayed, and what happened next left 300 guests in tears. This is a story about sacrifice, betrayal, and the kind of strength that doesn't shout. It happened in Lagos, in a church filled with white roses and promises, where a groom who had already bled for love discovered that love doesn't always bleed back. Before the vows could be spoken, before the rings could be exchanged, the truth walked through those heavy wooden doors and changed everything. This isn't about revenge, it's about what happens when the good man decides that dignity matters more than anger, when truth matters more than the perfect wedding photo. And it starts 6 months before that altar, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Michael Okonkwo was the kind of man who kept his promises, not the loud kind who announces every good deed, but the quiet kind who simply shows up. He worked as an engineer for an oil company in Port Harcourt. Steady income, steady life, steady dreams. His friends called him the Rock because nothing seemed to shake him. Not deadlines, not pressure, not even the chaotic Lagos traffic that tested every driver's patience. He met Grace Adeyemi at a mutual friend's wedding 3 years earlier. She was a financial analyst, sharp-minded, quick with numbers, and had a laugh that could fill a room. She wore her hair natural, had a small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall, and loved terrible romantic comedies that made Michael groan but watch anyway. They dated for 2 years before he proposed on a quiet beach in Badagry. No cameras, no crowd, just the two of them and the sound of waves. She said yes before he finished the question. Everything was ordinary, beautifully ordinary, until Grace started feeling tired. Not the usual end-of-week exhaustion, but a heaviness that sleep couldn't fix. She'd wake up with swollen ankles, headaches that pulsed behind her eyes, and a nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. Michael noticed first. He always noticed. He urged her to see a doctor. She postponed it twice. Busy with work, busy with wedding planning, busy with life. The third time he asked, he didn't give her a choice. He drove her to the hospital himself and waited in the lobby while they ran tests. When the doctor called them back into the office, Michael felt his stomach tighten. The doctor's face said everything before his mouth did. Grace's kidneys were failing. Stage 4 chronic kidney disease, the kind of diagnosis that rewrites futures and cancels plans. Grace cried in the car. Michael held her hand and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would make it better. The next few weeks blurred into appointments, specialists, dietary restrictions, and the slow realization that Grace would need a transplant. Her parents were tested first. Her father wasn't a match. Her mother had high blood pressure that ruled her out. Her younger brother was studying abroad and couldn't return immediately. Michael didn't wait for anyone to ask. He walked into the transplant coordinator's office and said, "Test me." Grace protested. She said it was too much, that they weren't even married yet, that he shouldn't have to do this. Michael looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "If not me, then who? If not now, then when?" He was a match, perfect compatibility. The doctor said it was rare, almost poetic. Michael didn't care about poetry. He cared about Grace being alive to argue with him about movie choices and burn his birthday cakes and wake up next to him for the next 50 years. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in March. Michael went in first. He remembered the cold of the operating table, the smell of the sterilized room, the anesthesiologist telling him to count backward from 10. He made it to 7. He woke up in pain, the kind of pain that sits in your side and reminds you with every breath that you're missing something. But when they wheeled Grace's bed next to his in recovery, and he saw her eyes open, saw color returning to her face, saw her smile weakly and mouth, "Thank you," the pain felt like nothing. She recovered faster than he did. Within weeks, she was back to her routines, her energy returning, her laughter loud again. Michael took longer. The incision healed slowly. He moved carefully for months, avoiding heavy lifting, learning to sleep on his back. His friends joked that he'd literally given his heart. He corrected them. "Just a kidney. She already had my heart." They set the wedding date for June, giving both of them time to fully recover. Grace threw herself into planning. Venue, caterer, flowers, guest list, every detail mapped out with the precision she brought to her spreadsheets. Michael let her lead, He showed up for tastings, nodded at collar swatches, and approved everything she suggested. He didn't care about the decorations. He cared that she was alive to plan them. 3 weeks before the wedding, something shifted. Grace became distant. She'd stare at her phone with a look Michael couldn't read. She'd leave rooms to take calls, speaking in low tones that stopped when he entered. When he asked if everything was okay, she'd smile too quickly and say, "Just wedding stress." Michael believed her because he wanted to, because doubting her meant doubting everything. Her younger brother Samuel finally returned from the UK 2 weeks before the wedding. Michael liked Samuel, had met him several times before, found him easy to talk to, maybe a little too charming. But family. Samuel stayed at Grace's apartment to help with last-minute preparations. Michael stayed at his own place, honoring the old tradition of not seeing the bride right before the wedding. They texted constantly though, or at least Michael texted constantly. Grace's responses grew shorter. "Busy. Call you later. Everything's fine." He told himself it was normal. Weddings were stressful. She was coordinating 300 guests, managing vendors, making sure everything was perfect. He'd see her at the altar and everything would make sense again. The night before the wedding, Michael couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the scar on his side, thinking about how much had changed in 6 months. He'd given a piece of himself. Tomorrow he'd give his whole life. The thought filled him with a contentment so deep it scared him. He texted Grace at 2 a.m. "Can't sleep. Too excited to call you my wife." She didn't respond. He figured she was asleep or doing some last-minute detail work, or maybe also staring at her ceiling thinking about tomorrow. He finally dozed off around 4 a.m., woke up at 6:30 to his alarm, and felt the nerves hit. Good nerves. The kind that come before big moments. He showered, dressed carefully, drove to the church an hour early. The place was already buzzing. Decorators making final adjustments to the flowers, caterers setting up tables. The band doing sound checks. Everything looked perfect. Michael walked through it all in a daze, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, feeling like he was floating. His best man Tony found him at 7 a.m. in the groom's preparation room. "You good?" Tony asked, straightening Michael's tie. "Never better," Michael said, and meant it. "You sure about this?" Tony asked, searching his face. "She's been weird lately, just making sure you're sure." Michael laughed. "I've never been more sure of anything. I gave her a kidney, man. I'm all in." Tony nodded, clapped him on the shoulder, but something in his eyes looked uncertain. Michael dismissed it. Tony was always overthinking things. At 7:10 a.m., Michael remembered he'd written a note for Grace, a small thing he wanted her to read before they met at the altar. Just a few lines about how much this day meant, how grateful he was that she was healthy and here. He folded it carefully and headed toward the bridal preparation area on the other side of the church. The hallway was quiet. Most people were still outside or in the main hall. He approached the door to Grace's room, raised his hand to knock, then heard voices. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Michael froze, Grace's voice low and urgent. "No, don't call me. After today, we'll figure it out. He won't suspect anything. He never does." A male voice responded. Too quiet for Michael to make out the words, but the tone was familiar. Too familiar. Grace again. "Listen, the account merge happens on Monday. The apartment lease is in both our names starting next week. We just need to get through the honeymoon. Then you and I can move forward without complications." Michael felt his heart stop. He pressed closer to the door, breath shallow, every nerve in his body screaming. The male voice spoke again, louder this time. "Samuel, Grace's brother Samuel. And you're sure he doesn't know?" Grace laughed, a sound that cut through Michael like glass. "Michael, he's too trusting, too good. That's always been his problem. He'll never see this coming." Michael stepped back from the door like it had burned him. His hands shook, his vision blurred, the hallway tilted. He didn't burst through the door, he didn't scream, he didn't do any of the things a reasonable person might expect. He simply stood there, notes still in his hand, trying to process what he just heard. The woman he'd given a kidney to, the woman he was about to marry, the woman he'd trusted with his entire future, was planning something with her brother. Not her brother. The way they'd spoken, the familiarity, the intimacy in Samuel's tone. Michael's mind raced through the past few weeks, Samuel arriving, Grace becoming distant, the constant phone calls, the way she'd insisted Samuel stay at her apartment instead of with their parents. The pieces assembled themselves into a picture Michael didn't want to see. He walked back down the hallway, legs moving on autopilot, and found himself in a small chapel off the main sanctuary. He sat in the front pew and stared at the cross above the altar. His phone buzzed. "Tony, where are you?" "Ceremony starts in 40 minutes. Michael typed back slowly. "I'm here, I'll be ready. Trust me. Don't stop anything." Tony sent back a question mark. Michael didn't respond. He sat there for 30 minutes, thinking. He could call it off, walk out, expose everything in front of everyone. He could confront Grace privately, demand answers, make her choose. He could pretend he heard nothing, marry her anyway, hope he'd misunderstood. Every option felt wrong except one. Tell the truth, publicly, calmly. Let everyone witness what honesty looks like when it stands in the place where lies were supposed to live. Michael wasn't an angry man. He'd never been the type to yell or throw things or make scenes, but he was a man who believed in truth, and if this wedding was going to happen, it would happen with truth standing at the altar too. He stood up, smoothed his suit, checked his reflection in a window. He looked calm. He felt like he was falling, but he'd made his decision. At 7:50 a.m., he walked to the sanctuary entrance. Guests were filing in, dressed in their best, smiling, excited. They had no idea. Michael took his position at the altar. Pastor Johnson smiled at him warmly. "Ready, son?" Michael nodded. "More than you know." The organ began. The wedding party processed down the aisle. Bridesmaids in coral dresses, groomsmen in black suits, everyone moving in practiced formation. Then, the doors opened wider and Grace appeared. She looked stunning. Her dress was simple, elegant, fitted at the top and flowing at the bottom. Her natural hair was styled in an elaborate updo with small, white flowers woven through it. She held a bouquet of white roses and wore the diamond necklace Michael had given her on their second anniversary. She smiled at the guests as she walked, radiating joy. Michael watched her approach and felt nothing but sadness. She reached the altar. Her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Michael's. Her hand was warm. Her smile was wide. Her eyes met his, and for just a moment, a flicker of something passed through them. Uncertainty maybe, or guilt, but it vanished quickly. Pastor Johnson began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Michael and Grace in holy matrimony." The pastor went through the traditional opening, talking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Michael heard the words from a distance like they were happening to someone else. Grace kept glancing at him, her smile starting to waver. She could sense something was off. Michael's face gave nothing away. The pastor continued, "Before we proceed with the vows, I want to remind everyone here that marriage is built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. It is a covenant not just between two people, but before God and this community." Michael felt the moment arriving. The pastor turned to him. "Michael, I believe you've prepared your own vows." Michael nodded. He hadn't prepared anything. Everything he'd written was ash now, but he knew exactly what he needed to say. He took a breath and looked directly at Grace. "I did prepare something," he said, his voice steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the church. "But I need to say something different now." The room shifted. Guests leaned forward. Grace's smile froze. Pastor Johnson looked confused but nodded for him to continue. Michael turned to face the congregation. 6 months ago, I woke up in a hospital bed missing a kidney. I gave it willingly because the woman standing next to me needed it to live. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think twice. I loved her and I wanted her to survive and thrive and live a full life. That choice was easy." He paused. The church was completely silent. "This morning, before I came to this altar, I heard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I heard the woman I love making plans for a future that doesn't include me as her husband, only as someone who served his purpose." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Grace's face went pale. Her bouquet trembled in her hands. "Michael, please," she whispered. "Not here." He looked at her gently, without anger. "Where then?" "In private. where we can both pretend this didn't happen, where you can explain it away and I can choose to believe you because it's easier. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Her mother stood up in the third row, face twisted in shock. Samuel, sitting near the back, started to rise, but Tony, who'd moved to block the aisle, shook his head sharply. Michael continued, voice still calm. I don't want to embarrass anyone. I don't want revenge. I just want truth to have a seat at this altar, because if we can't have truth here, in front of everyone who loves us, then we have nothing. He turned back to Grace. You can tell them what I heard, or I can, but someone needs to say it out loud. Grace was openly crying now, mascara starting to run despite the waterproof promises. She looked at the pastor, at her parents, at the 300 people watching, waiting. I made a terrible mistake, she said, voice barely audible. Michael gave me everything and I betrayed that. The church erupted in whispers. Michael raised a hand and the noise died down. Tell them who, he said quietly. They deserve the whole truth. Grace's shoulders shook. She looked at the floor. Samuel isn't my brother, she said, so quietly people in the back couldn't hear. Michael repeated it, louder. Samuel isn't her brother. He's someone she's been involved with since before my surgery. Apparently, the plan was to get married, merge accounts, secure the apartment we put down payment on together, then leave after the honeymoon. More gasps. Grace's mother let out a sound like a wounded animal. Her father sat frozen, face unreadable. Samuel stood up fully now, face flushed. This is insane, I started to say, but Tony moved toward him and Samuel sat back down. Michael pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I brought this in case I needed it, he said. It's an email chain between Grace and Samuel discussing timelines, discussing me, discussing what to do after the wedding. I didn't want to use it. I wanted Grace to be honest on her own. He held it up, but didn't open it. I'm giving you a choice, he said to Grace. We can stop this wedding right now, go our separate ways, and let everyone here eat the food we paid for and celebrate honesty instead of false promises. Or you can keep lying and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what they're witnessing. Grace crumpled. She dropped the bouquet and covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. You were so good to me, and I was scared and stupid, and I thought if I had a backup plan, if I had Samuel, I wouldn't feel so vulnerable. Michael felt a flash of anger, the first real emotion breaking through his calm. Vulnerable. I gave you a kidney. I gave you my life. What more did I need to prove? Grace had no answer. The pastor stepped forward, clearly out of his depth. Perhaps we should pause, take this somewhere private. Michael shook his head. No, I want everyone here to witness this. I want truth to matter in a building that's supposed to be about truth. He turned to the congregation. I'm canceling the wedding. The vows won't happen. Grace and I are done, but the reception will continue. The food is paid for. The band is here. Stay, eat, dance, if you want. Consider it a celebration of dodging a bigger disaster later. He looked at Grace one more time. You can keep the engagement ring. Consider it payment for the drama. He started to remove his wedding ring, then remembered. He hadn't put it on yet. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. Tony appeared at his side, concern etched on his face. You need to get out of here, man. Michael nodded. But before he left, he had one more thing to say. He walked to the microphone stand that had been set up for speeches during the reception. I want to say something to everyone here, he announced. The room, already in chaos, quieted slightly. Some of you traveled far to be here. Some of you gave gifts. Some of you prayed for us. I want you to know that I'm grateful, not for the wedding that didn't happen, but for the reminder that you all cared enough to show up. That matters. He paused. There's a donation box near the entrance. If you were planning to give us money, please give it to the Renal Foundation of Nigeria instead. They help people who need kidney transplants but can't afford them. Grace doesn't need it. She got hers for free. A few people laughed, uncomfortable but appreciative of the dark humor. Michael stepped away from the microphone and walked down the aisle. Guests parted for him like the Red Sea. Tony followed, and so did a few other friends. Michael made it outside into the brutal Lagos heat. The sun felt appropriate, burning away pretense. He stood on the church steps and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since 7:10 that morning. You okay? Tony asked, knowing the answer. No, Michael said, but I will be. Inside, chaos continued. Grace was surrounded by her family, her mother screaming, her father silent and stone-faced. Samuel had disappeared, slipping out a side door. The guests didn't know whether to leave or stay. Eventually, most stayed. The caterers served food. The band, after a brief consultation, played music. It became the strangest reception Lagos had ever seen. A wedding celebration without a wedding, everyone processing shock and admiration and confusion in equal measure. Michael didn't attend. He went home, changed out of his suit, and sat on his balcony watching the city move below him. His phone exploded with messages, some supportive, some asking for details, some from people he hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly interested in his life. He turned the phone off. 3 days later, Grace showed up at his apartment. He almost didn't let her in, but curiosity won. She looked terrible, eyes swollen, face drawn. They sat in his living room, the space between them vast, despite the small room. "I don't expect forgiveness," she started. "I just needed you to know it wasn't about you being inadequate. You were perfect, too perfect. I got scared that I didn't deserve it, that eventually you'd see through me and leave. So I made sure I had somewhere to land when you did." Michael listened without interrupting. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," he finally said. "You destroyed something real because you were afraid it wasn't real." Grace nodded, tears starting again. "I know. I'll regret this for the rest of my life." "Good," Michael said, not cruelly, just honestly. "You should." She left after 10 minutes. He never saw her again. She moved out of Lagos a month later, relocating to Abuja for work. Samuel disappeared entirely, cut off by Grace's family and his own reputation destroyed. Michael took a month off work. He traveled to Zanzibar alone, sat on beaches, read books he'd been meaning to read, and slowly felt the pieces of himself reassemble. People asked him how he was so calm during the wedding, how he didn't explode or attack anyone. He always gave the same answer. Anger would have made it about me and my hurt. Truth made it about what's right. One fades, the other doesn't. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Michael met someone new. Her name was Amara. She worked as a pediatric nurse, and she thought his scar was proof he knew how to love hard. They took things slow, painfully slow, because trust doesn't rebuild quickly, but it did rebuild. A year later, Michael attended a friend's wedding. He sat in the back, watched the couple exchange vows, and felt happy for them, without feeling bitter for himself. Tony leaned over during the reception. "You ever think about trying again?" Michael smiled. "With Amara, maybe, eventually, when it's right." "I meant getting married in general." "Same answer," Michael said. The story of Michael's wedding spread across Lagos and beyond, shared in barbershops and market stalls and corporate break rooms. Some people called him a hero, some called him foolish for not handling it privately. Most called him honest. And in a city where public image often mattered more than private truth, that was its own kind of radical. Michael didn't think of himself as any of those things. He thought of himself as someone who'd made a hard choice and lived with it. Years later, when people asked him if he regretted the public confrontation, he always said no. Lies thrive in private, he'd explained. Truth needs witnesses, not for revenge, but for accountability. Grace had to face what she did in front of everyone who was supposed to celebrate us. That was fair. He never regretted the kidney donation either. People assumed he would, assumed bitterness would poison even that memory. But he'd given it when love was real, when his intentions were pure, and that couldn't be taken back or tainted by what came after. "I didn't give her my kidney because I expected her to be perfect," he told a friend once. "I gave it because she needed it and I could help. The fact that she later proved herself unworthy of my trust doesn't change the fact that the choice I made was good. I'd make it again, even knowing how it ends." That kind of clarity, that refusal to let betrayal poison previous goodness, became Michael's defining characteristic. He carried no visible bitterness, no anger that seeped into other relationships, no walls too high for people to climb. He'd been hurt, yes, deeply, but he'd also responded with a dignity that let him walk away clean. And maybe that was the real lesson in all of it. Not that betrayal doesn't hurt, not that trust isn't risky, but that how you respond to pain determines whether it destroys you or refines you. Michael chose refinement. He chose truth over comfort, honesty over image, and dignity over revenge. And in doing so, he gave everyone who witnessed that wedding something to think about. Long after the flowers wilted and the uneaten cake was donated to a local children's home. So now I'll ask you, What would you have done standing at that altar? Knowing what Michael knew, would you have walked away quietly, confronted her privately, or done exactly what he did and let truth stand where vows were supposed to be? And if you were in Grace's position, carrying guilt and fear and bad choices, would you have confessed before the wedding, or would you have hoped the secret stayed buried? These aren't easy questions, and there are no perfect answers, only the ones we have to live with. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from and how this story made you feel. Would you have had Michael's strength, or would anger have won? We want to hear from you. And if this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or question, hit that subscribe button. Next week, we're bringing you another story that'll test everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the price of truth. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth when it costs you everything.